First story, The Freezing Night in Alberta, Canada, 1976. I don't know how to explain what happened to me that night. Hell, I don't even know if I want to. But every time I close my eyes, I see those pale faces staring at me. Those black, empty eyes drilling into my skull like they could see everything inside me. I've been driving trucks for almost 2 decades, spent more nights on the road than in my own bed. But nothing has ever come close to what happened that night on the highway outside of Fort McMurray, Alberta. It was the winter of '76, one of the coldest nights I can remember. The kind of cold that burns your skin and makes your bones ache. I was hauling a load of lumber down one of those long, desolate stretches of road, the kind where you don't see another soul for hours. Just me, the truck, and the dark. That's when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was the Aurora Borealis. I'd seen them plenty of times before, those green and purple ribbons dancing in the sky. But this wasn't like that. The light was too intense, too focused. It started as a faint glow above the treetops, but within seconds it was everywhere, swallowing the sky. My radio crackled, then died. The dashboard lights flickered, and then, just like that, the truck shut down. Dead. No engine, no headlights. Nothing. Just silence. I tried turning the key. Nothing. I remember the panic setting in, my breath fogging up in front of me as the cold crept into the cab. The heater had been blasting full force, but suddenly it was like I was sitting inside a freezer. My fingers went numb as I reached for my flashlight, but before I could even grab it, everything around me turned white. Not just the road, not just the trees, everything. It was like I had been swallowed whole by the light itself. I couldn't move. Not my arms, not my legs, not even my fingers. I wasn't asleep. I was completely aware, completely conscious, but my body didn't belong to me anymore. I wanted to scream, to kick, to run, but all I could do was sit there, frozen. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening, but nothing made sense. Then came the sound, a low hum, vibrating deep inside my chest, like it was inside me rather than outside. My vision blurred, my head felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, and for the first time in my life I thought, this is it. I'm dying. Then, darkness. When I came to, I wasn't in my truck anymore, at least I don't think I was. I was lying on my back, but not on the worn-out leather seat of my cab. The surface beneath me was cold, hard, and impossibly smooth. Like metal, but softer somehow, almost like skin. The air smelled sterile, like a hospital, but heavier, denser, like I was breathing something thicker than air. I couldn't move at first. My arms, my legs, hell, even my eyelids felt like they weighed a ton. My body wasn't my own, but I could see. Above me, the ceiling curved into an arch, seamless. No bolts, no rivets, no seams. Just one continuous, metallic surface glowing with a soft, pulsing light. I remember thinking it wasn't normal. Nothing about it was normal. Then, just as I started regaining control over my fingers, my arms, my breath, I saw them. They weren't human. At least not completely. Their skin had this grayish tint, but not like paint or dust. More like something that had never known sunlight, something wrong. Their faces were stretched, their eyes impossibly large, deep, and black, like 2 pools of oil reflecting the dim light. No pupils, no whites, just black. They didn't have expressions, not really, but they were looking at me, studying me. I knew that much. I wanted to scream, to push myself off whatever surface I was lying on, but as soon as I tried, I realized I wasn't in control. My body moved, but it wasn't me moving it. I felt my head turn to the side, felt my arms rise slightly, but I wasn't the one doing it. It was like being trapped inside myself, like some invisible force was testing how much control it could take. Then, I felt something enter my mind. Not a voice, not words, just pressure, like something was pressing down on my thoughts, shifting them, rifling through them like pages in a book. The next part is hard to explain. I wasn't awake, but I wasn't unconscious either. It was like my mind had been pulled somewhere else while my body stayed behind. I saw flashes, images that weren't mine, a vast, endless space, stars swirling in patterns. That didn't make sense, planets that I knew weren't Earth. Then something else, a hand, my hand, reaching out, touching something smooth, cold, wet. A figure in front of me, tall and thin, watching me with those black, empty eyes. I don't know if it was minutes or hours, but the next thing I remember, I was back in my truck. No transition, no fading in or out, just there. 1 second I was somewhere else, and the next I was gripping my steering wheel, gasping for air, my skin covered in cold sweat. The truck was running, headlights on, engine humming like nothing had happened. But the clock was wrong. I had lost nearly 4 hours. 4 hours. I just sat there, hands white-knuckling the steering wheel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold that had seeped into my bones earlier was gone, replaced by an unnatural warmth, like I'd been sitting under a heat lamp for too long. But the worst part, the part that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it, was the silence. Highways are never silent. Even in the dead of night, there's always something. The wind whistling through the cracks of the door, the distant howl of some coyote, the groan of the truck's engine settling. But there was nothing. Just a thick, suffocating quiet that pressed down on me like a weight. It was like the whole world had stopped. My heart was hammering so hard in my chest that I thought it might burst, but I forced myself to look at the dashboard. The clock read 3:47 a.m. That couldn't be right. The last time I'd checked, it had been just past midnight. I hadn't just blacked out for a minute or two, I had lost over 4 hours. I reached for my CB radio with shaking fingers, desperate to hear something, anything that would ground me back in reality, but all I got was static. No chatter from other truckers, no distant voice breaking through the interference, just an eerie, hissing static that sent a shiver down my spine. It was like the whole world had gone dead. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the rising panic, and turned my headlights onto the road ahead. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Not tire tracks, not animal prints, but footprints, right in the middle of the snow-covered highway, leading away from my truck. They were strange, too long, too narrow, like someone had walked barefoot through the snow, but the spacing was wrong. Too evenly placed, too precise, like whoever, or whatever, had made them didn't walk the way we do. I stared at them, my mind scrambling to come up with an explanation. Had I gotten out of the truck? Had someone else been here? I didn't remember leaving my seat. I didn't remember anything between the light swallowing me and waking up behind the wheel. But something had been there. Something had stood there, right in front of my truck, before walking away into the darkness. My stomach twisted as I opened the door and stepped onto the icy ground. My legs felt like jelly, my knees threatening to buckle under me, but I had to see. The prince led off the road, disappearing into the tree line. The rational part of me screamed to get back inside, to turn the key and drive as far as I could, but my body moved on its own. I took one step, then another. The air was thick, suffocating, and the silence was unbearable, but I kept going. And then, just as I reached the edge of the trees, I saw it. Something metallic, something smooth, peeking through the branches, reflecting the faint glow of my headlights. And before I could even process what I was seeing, a sharp, searing pain ripped through my skull, blinding me in an instant. It felt like 1,000 needles piercing my brain all at once, like something had reached inside my head and started twisting, pulling, digging. I collapsed onto my knees, clutching my temples, my vision flashing between blackness and blinding white. My ears rang, high-pitched and unbearable, as if my skull was being split open from the inside. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up, my body rigid as the pain grew and grew. And then, suddenly, nothing. Silence again. No pain, no light, just nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the truck. I don't know how. I don't know what happened in those few seconds or minutes or hours. I have no idea, but I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers ached. My headlights were still on, illuminating the empty road ahead. The footprints, gone. The metallic shape in the woods, gone. Even the snow on the ground looked undisturbed, like I had never stepped out in the first place, but I knew I had. I knew what I had seen. My whole body was drenched in sweat, my shirt clinging to my skin, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. And then I looked down at my arm. My sleeve was rolled up, my skin exposed. And there, just below the crook of my elbow, was a mark. A perfect, circular indentation, like something had pressed against my flesh with inhuman precision. It wasn't red. It wasn't bruised. It was just there, like it had always been. And that was when I finally lost it. I slammed my foot down on the gas, my truck roaring back to life, and I drove. Fast, faster than I ever had before. I didn't care about the ice, didn't care about the weight I was hauling. I just needed to get away. I don't remember much about the drive after that. It's all a blur of headlights cutting through the dark, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My heart was racing, my whole body trembling as I kept my eyes locked on the road, refusing to look in the mirrors. I didn't want to see if someone was behind me. Every muscle in my body was screaming at me to go faster, to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever had happened back there. But no matter how far I drove, the feeling didn't go away. The sickening knowing that something had changed. That something had been inside my head. I kept replaying it over and over, the white light swallowing me, the sensation of being looked at, the soundless presence of those things studying me like I was nothing more than a bug under glass. My mind felt violated, like someone had gone rifling through my thoughts and left the drawers open, things scattered in places they didn't belong. My hands were still shaking when I reached a gas station, the first one I had seen in hours. I pulled in, turned off the engine, and just sat there, trying to catch my breath. The truck rumbled as it cooled, the normal sounds of the engine settling in after a long drive. But it didn't feel normal. Nothing felt normal anymore. I forced myself to get out, my legs weak and unsteady, and walked into the small, dimly lit station. The guy behind the counter barely looked up as I stepped inside, the bell over the door jingling like it was any other night. I must have looked like hell because when I went to pay for a cup of coffee, the guy actually looked at me. "You good, man?" he asked, his voice casual but his eyes scanning me like I might drop dead right there. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to open my mouth and let it all spill out. The lights, the lost time, the footprints, the mark on my arm. But what was I supposed to say? I think I was taken by something not human, that I had woken up in a place that wasn't real, that my memories felt like they had been ripped apart and stitched back together the wrong way. I just shook my head, muttered something about being tired, and took my coffee back to the truck. But as I sat there in the cab, hands wrapped around the warm cup, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The clock on my dashboard. 3:47 a.m. The same time it had been when I woke up on the road. The exact same. The numbers hadn't changed. My stomach twisted as I checked my watch. Same thing. My phone, dead. It was like time had stopped for those 4 hours and then started again the second I had woken up. The hairs on my arms stood on end, a cold shiver crawling down my spine. Something was wrong. I left that gas station as fast as I could, pushing the truck back onto the road, back into the night. But the further I drove, the worse the feeling got. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something deeper. Something inside me had changed. I could feel it. Every time I blinked, I saw flashes. Quick, blurred images that disappeared the moment I tried to focus on them. A corridor too white, too smooth. Hands that weren't hands reaching for me. A soundless hum vibrating in my bones. I gripped the wheel tighter, my pulse hammering in my ears. I told myself it was just exhaustion, just stress, but deep down, I knew that was a lie. Because when I glanced in the side mirror just for a second, I swore I saw something behind me. Not a car, not headlights, a shape. Something tall and thin, standing just beyond the reach of my taillights, watching, waiting, and the second I turned my head, it was gone. Like it had never been there at all, but I knew better. I knew. I wasn't alone anymore. Maybe I never had been. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to drive the long hauls anymore. Every stretch of empty road felt like a trap, every flicker of light in the distance a threat. I started taking shorter routes, sticking close to towns, places with people, places where I could see what was around me. But the feeling never left. That awareness that something had changed, something had been done to me. Sleep became a rare commodity. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see their faces. Gray, expressionless, their black eyes pulling me back into that cold, sterile place. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like I was still out there on that highway, still trapped in that white light. I went to a doctor, tried explaining the insomnia, the nightmares, but how do you tell a man in a white coat that you're afraid of something that doesn't belong in this world? He gave me pills, told me it was stress, maybe PTSD from being on the road too long, but the pills didn't help. If anything, they made it worse. They made the images clearer, sharper. I started finding things in my truck that I didn't recognize. A pen that wasn't mine, a scrap of paper with strange symbols that looked almost like letters, but weren't. Little things, but enough to make my skin crawl. Enough to make me question if they had ever really let me go. I tried to move on. I really did. Sold the truck, got a job working the docks, loading and unloading cargo. No more nights alone on the road. No more dark highways stretching out into nowhere. But even then, they found me. I'd catch glimpses out of the corner of my eye, shadows that moved too quickly, lights that flickered in patterns that didn't make sense. I'd hear that low hum sometimes, right as I was falling asleep, vibrating through my teeth, pulling me back to that night. I stopped talking to people, stopped trying to explain. How could I? How do you tell someone that you were taken, that you were changed, without them looking at you like you've lost your mind? I stopped leaving the house after dark, boarded up the windows, kept the lights on all night. But it didn't matter. They didn't need darkness to reach me. They were always there, just beyond the edges of my sight, just out of reach. I became a ghost in my own life, haunted by something. I couldn't see, couldn't touch, couldn't fight. One night, months after it happened, I woke up with a start, my body drenched in cold sweat. The air in the room was thick, heavy, like it had been in that cab. I fumbled for the lamp on my nightstand, my fingers trembling as the light flooded the room. And there, right in the middle of the floor, was another mark, like the one on my arm, but bigger, etched into the wood like it had been burned there. A perfect circle, smooth and precise. I stared at it, my breath coming in shallow gasps, the walls of my room closing in around me. It was a warning, a reminder that they weren't done with me, that they could come back whenever they wanted. I tried scrubbing it out, sanding it down, but it never faded. It was part of the wood now, part of my home. Just like they were part of me. That's when I realized it wasn't about where I was, what I was doing, or how many locks I put on my doors. They had left a mark on me, inside me, and there was no running from that. No hiding. All I could do was wait for the lights to come back, for the humming to start again, for that paralyzing cold to seep into my bones. Because it wasn't over. It would never be over. I don't talk about it much anymore. People don't want to hear it, and I don't blame them. It's easier to believe I was overtired, that I dozed off behind the wheel, that my mind filled in the blanks with some kind of waking nightmare. But I know the truth. I felt it. I lived it. And the worst part isn't what happened that night, it's what's still happening. Because sometimes when I wake up, I know I've been somewhere else. My sheets are damp with sweat. My body's sore like I've been lying on something cold and hard instead of my own bed. And the clock, every damn time, always reads 3:47 a.m. Sometimes I find new marks. Faint, barely noticeable, but they're there. Tiny incisions that heal too fast. Bruises in places that don't make sense. And the dreams. God. The dreams. They aren't even dreams anymore, they're memories. Memories of places I don't recognize but somehow know. Memories of them, watching, studying, waiting. I don't know what they want. I don't know why. They chose me. But I do know one thing. They're not done. And one day, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, I know the lights will come back. I know I'll wake up in that white, empty place again. And this time, I might not come back. Second story, the BR-153 highway case, Brazil, 1978. I was hauling cargo down the BR-153 that night, somewhere near Anápolis, Goiás. I had been on the road for hours, feeling the weight of fatigue settle in my bones, but nothing too out of the ordinary. It was the kind of exhaustion that every trucker knows, your body screaming for rest, but your mind sharp enough to keep going. The road stretched ahead, a dark, empty void, the only company being the dull hum of my diesel engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. And then, just like that, everything changed. The radio cut to static. The headlights flickered and died. The engine coughed once, twice, then fell silent as if something had sucked the life out of it. I was left in complete darkness, the silence so thick it pressed against my chest. And that's when I saw it. A floating light, pulsing like a living thing, hovering just above the road ahead. It wasn't a regular beam of light, not from a plane or a tower. It moved with intention, circling like it was watching me. My stomach twisted in a way that had nothing to do with fatigue. This wasn't normal. I tried turning the key. Nothing. Not even a click. I reached for my flashlight and stepped out of the cab, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't name. The hairs on my arms stood on end, like when you're too close to an old CRT television. I looked up, and my breath caught in my throat. The light. No, the thing was hovering directly above me now, bathing the entire truck in a pale, unnatural glow. My skin tingled, a numbness spreading from my fingertips to my chest. The strangest part, the silence. No insects, No wind, no sound at all, except for my own ragged breathing. Then, out of nowhere, a sharp, piercing sound filled my skull. Not with my ears, but inside my head, vibrating through my bones. It wasn't noise, it was something else, something trying to reach me in a way that felt entirely inhuman. My vision blurred, and my body turned to jelly. I collapsed to my knees, gripping the truck's metal step, trying to hold on to something real. That's when I saw it. The beam. A column of light shot down, engulfing me completely. It wasn't warm or cold, it was just there, a force without sensation pulling me upwards. My feet left the ground, my arms flailed, but there was nothing to grab onto. I wasn't falling, I was rising. My truck shrank below me, swallowed by the night, and before I could even scream, everything around me shifted. No transition, no warning, just a blink, and I was somewhere else. A room, but not a room. Bright but without lights. White, featureless walls that seemed to stretch forever, yet closed in on me at the same time. And they were there. Small, thin bodies, skin the color of ash, oversized heads with black, liquid eyes that reflected everything and nothing at once. They didn't move like people. No shifts of weight, no breathing, just stillness. But I knew they were watching me. I felt them in my mind. Words formed that weren't mine. Images flashing too fast for me to process. A pressure, a weight in my skull that built and built until I thought my head would crack open. And then, blackness. I came back to myself all at once, like waking up after falling asleep in the middle of a conversation. My body ached, like I had been hit by something massive, but there wasn't a single bruise or cut on me. The room was gone. The creatures were gone. I was back in my truck, slumped against the driver's seat, hands still gripping the wheel. The dashboard lights flickered weakly before everything powered back up at once. The radio, the headlights, even the engine, purring as if nothing had ever happened. But something was wrong. The air inside the cab smelled different, stale, almost metallic. My throat was dry, my tongue thick like I had been out for hours without water. My hands were shaking so bad, I had to clench them into fists just to keep control of myself. I reached for my phone to check the time, but when I saw the clock on the dashboard, my stomach twisted into a tight knot. 3 hours. I had lost 3 whole hours. Panic hit me like a freight train. I grabbed the logbook, flipping through the last entry I had written. The numbers didn't match. The time on the tachograph showed I had been idle for hours. Something that should have been impossible. I knew for a fact I'd been driving non-stop before the light appeared. My heart pounded in my chest as I opened the door and stumbled out, my legs unsteady beneath me. The road was empty, just like before. The sky was the same ink-black void. But as I walked around the truck, something made my breath catch in my throat. The dirt and gravel beneath the tires looked disturbed. Not like someone had driven through, but like something had pressed down on it, leaving behind circular indentations that didn't belong there. They were too perfect, too symmetrical, arranged in a pattern that made no sense. I knelt down, running my fingers over the strange marks. The moment my skin touched the dirt, a shiver ran up my spine. It felt warm, like something had been there, just minutes ago. I got back in the truck and locked the doors, trying to convince myself that I was just exhausted, that my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe I had dozed off, maybe I had imagined everything. But deep down, I knew better. Something had happened, something real. My body still felt off, like I was wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. My stomach churned with a nausea that had nothing to do with hunger. I turned the key, praying that the engine would start like normal, that I could put this whole thing behind me. It roared to life without hesitation. But as I pulled back onto the road, something in the rearview mirror, made my blood run cold. Far off in the distance, hovering just above the treetops, was the same light. Not fading, not disappearing, just watching. I drove. I don't even remember shifting gears, pressing the pedals, or steering the wheel, just the overwhelming need to get away. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles ached, but I couldn't loosen them. My foot pressed harder and harder on the accelerator, the truck groaning under the strain, but I didn't care. I kept glancing in the mirrors, expecting the light to disappear, for everything to go back to normal. But it was still there, always at the edge of my vision, floating, following, waiting. My heart pounded in my ears, my breath came in short, ragged gasps. And for the first time in my life, I genuinely wondered if I was about to die. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light was gone. I didn't see it fly away, didn't watch it blink out. It was just there 1 second and gone the next, like it had never existed. The moment it disappeared, something inside me snapped. My whole body trembled, my muscles weak and useless. I had to pull over because my vision blurred with tears I didn't even realize were falling. I sat there for what felt like forever, staring out at the empty road, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined it? The truck was running fine, the world outside was the same, and yet nothing felt real anymore. Everything was off in a way I couldn't explain. The air smelled different. My skin felt strange, too tight, too wrong. And the worst part, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, not in the truck, not even in my own body. It took me a long time to gather the courage to check my body. My hands were still shaking as I lifted my shirt, scanning my skin for bruises, cuts, anything that might explain what had happened. At first I saw nothing. But then my fingers brushed over something just below my ribcage. A mark. Small, circular, and unnervingly smooth, like the skin had been burned away and healed over perfectly in an instant. The second I touched it, shudder ran through my whole body, and for the briefest moment I saw something, not with my eyes, but in my head. A flash of white walls, that same sterile, empty space, a shape standing over me, watching, and a voice, no, not a voice, a thought that wasn't mine, pressed into my brain like a brand. You are not the first, you are not the last. Then it was gone. I jerked my hand away from the mark, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. What the hell had they done to me? My stomach churned, and I barely managed to fling the door open before vomiting onto the asphalt. The taste was bitter, metallic, wrong. When I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, I froze. There was blood, not from my throat, not from my stomach. It was coming from my nose, dripping thick and slow onto my lap. I don't know how long I sat there shaking, feeling more alien in my own skin than I ever had before. I couldn't stay there. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to keep moving, to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever had happened back there. But as I reached for the gear shift, my fingers hesitated. A sudden, suffocating sense of dread settled over me, like something wasn't finished yet. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look around the cab, checking every shadow, every corner, as if expecting something to be there. But it was just me, just the truck, just the dark road stretching ahead. I told myself that if I could just make it to the next gas station, I'd be fine. I'd splash some water on my face, get some coffee, maybe even ask someone if they'd seen anything strange out here tonight. Anything to convince myself that I wasn't losing my mind. So I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my fingernails dug into my palms. The first few miles were quiet. Too quiet. No passing cars, no signs of life, just the empty road and the weight of something I couldn't explain pressing down on me. And then I saw it. Not the light. Something else. Something standing at the edge of the highway just beyond the reach of my headlights. At first, I thought it was a person, some stranded traveler, maybe a hitchhiker. But as I got closer, my stomach dropped into my feet. It wasn't human. I slammed on the brakes before my brain even registered what I was doing. The truck skidded slightly, tires screeching against the pavement, and for a split second, I thought about throwing it into reverse, about getting as far away from whatever that thing was. But I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. My hands were locked around the wheel, my entire body stiff and useless, like something had switched me off from the inside. I could only sit there, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps as my headlights finally washed over it. It stood on the shoulder of the road, completely still, facing me. Not tall, maybe 4 feet at most, its body thin and frail looking. Its skin had that same ashen gray tone I had seen before, smooth and reflective under the harsh glare of the lights. Its arms were too long for its body, hanging down almost to its knees. And its head. God, its head. Large and bulbous, featureless except for those massive black eyes, 2 perfect soulless voids that swallowed everything. It didn't blink, it didn't breathe, it just watched me. My chest tightened as that awful buzzing sensation returned, deep in my skull, like something was pressing into my brain with invisible hands. A static, a noise that wasn't a noise, a feeling that wasn't a feeling. I knew what was happening. It was inside my head again. A sudden flood of images, quick, fragmented, like flipping through a book at high speed. Blinding white corridors. Rows of metal tables, more of them, dozens, maybe hundreds, standing in a circle around something I couldn't see, a sensation of weightlessness, of floating, of being completely and utterly helpless. And then, a face. Not theirs. Mine. Staring back at me like a reflection in a warped mirror. But my expression was wrong. Empty. Like I wasn't there anymore. A sharp, electric pain lanced through my skull, and the vision shattered, leaving me gasping like I had just been drowning. My body jerked forward violently, breaking whatever invisible hold had kept me frozen in place. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my foot onto the accelerator, the truck lurching forward with a roar. My heart pounded so hard I thought my ribs would crack. As I passed, the figure didn't move. It didn't step back, didn't flinch, didn't do anything. It just stood there, turning its head slightly to watch me as I sped past, its gaze locking onto mine for one unbearable moment before disappearing into the darkness. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I drove like a madman, pushing the truck faster than I ever had before, gripping the wheel so hard my fingers went numb. I had to get away. I had to leave that thing behind. But deep down, in some horrible, gut-wrenching part of me, I knew the truth. It wasn't behind me. It was inside me. By the time I reached the next gas station, my entire body was shaking. I pulled in too fast, the truck jerking violently as I slammed on the brakes. The station was almost empty, just a couple of cars parked near the convenience store, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Normal. Too normal. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs barely holding me up, and staggered toward the restroom. My reflection in the mirror stopped me cold. I looked wrong. My skin was pale, my eyes bloodshot, my pupils blown so wide that barely any color remained. But that wasn't what scared me the most. It was the expression, that same emptiness, that same blank, hollow stare from the vision. Like I wasn't there anymore. My breath hitched. I leaned in closer, heart hammering against my ribs, and then, just for a split second, I saw it move, my reflection. It blinked, but I didn't. My stomach dropped. I stumbled back, my head spinning, the buzzing returning full force, louder than ever, rattling inside my skull. I gripped the sink, squeezing my eyes shut, whispering to myself, "You're okay, you're okay, you're okay." But when I opened them again, I knew I wasn't okay. I was never going to be okay again. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at my own reflection, waiting for it to do something else. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, and that horrible static feeling in my skull wouldn't go away. My fingers gripped the edge of the sink so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I kept telling myself that I was just exhausted, that my mind was playing tricks on me, that none of this was real. But I knew better. Something was real. The lost time, the mark on my ribs, the thing on the side of the road. I had proof. I had felt it. And no matter how much I wanted to believe this was some kind of stress-induced hallucination, my gut told me otherwise. I forced myself to move, splashing cold water on my face, trying to snap myself out of whatever trance I had fallen into. The water felt normal, grounding me for a second, but the moment I looked back up, something inside me screamed to run. Because this time, when I saw my reflection, the me in the mirror wasn't staring back anymore. It was looking past me, at something over my shoulder. I spun around so fast I nearly slipped on the wet floor, my breath catching in my throat. The restroom was empty. No one was there. Nothing. Just the sound of the buzzing fluorescent light above me, flickering slightly. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper, and turned back toward the mirror, my heart still slamming against my ribs. My reflection was normal again, but I wasn't. I didn't feel like myself anymore. The sense of wrongness had settled deep into my bones, into my skin, like something had burrowed inside me. I backed away from the mirror, out of the restroom, barely aware of my own legs moving. The gas station felt off, like I had stepped into a version of reality that looked the same but wasn't. The cashier barely glanced at me as I stumbled toward the counter, my voice shaking as I asked, "Hey, you guys get a lot of weird lights out here?" The guy didn't even look up from his magazine, he just shrugged. Sometimes. That was it. No concern, no curiosity. Just another night on the BR-153, like nothing had happened, like I was the only one who knew. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think I slept for days after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. The empty corridors, the massive black eyes, the reflection that wasn't mine. The buzzing in my head never fully went away. It got quieter, sure, but it was always there, lurking in the back of my mind, like something had been left inside me, like a part of me hadn't made it back. I quit trucking a few months later. Couldn't do it anymore. Every time I drove at night, I felt watched. Every time I saw headlights in my mirrors, my stomach clenched, expecting them to rise off the ground and follow me. I don't talk about it much. What's the point? People either laugh or get that look in their eyes, the one that says they think you're crazy but don't want to say it out loud. But I know what happened. I know I wasn't dreaming, and I know one day they'll come back for me. The worst part, I don't think I'm scared of them anymore. I should be. I was for a long time. But lately, the fear has started to fade, replaced by something else, something worse. Recognition. Some nights I catch myself staring out the window, searching the sky without even realizing it. Other times I wake up in the middle of the night with the distinct feeling that I've been somewhere else, that I've been taken again. I just don't remember it. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, When I catch my own reflection in the corner of my eye, I swear to God, I see it blink, but I don't.
If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more spine-chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is pinned in the first comment, and even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey.
Third story, the Bergson case, Norway, 1980. I've been a truck driver for over 20 years, and I've seen my fair share of strange things on the road, animals appearing out of nowhere, cars tailing me for miles and vanishing, even shadows in the woods that didn't seem quite right. But nothing, and I mean nothing, comes close to what happened to me that night in 1980. I was driving through the freezing Norwegian roads, alone, just my truck and the endless stretch of highway ahead. The night was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you feel like the world around you isn't real. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional crunch of ice under my tires. It was around 2 a.m., and I was just trying to make it to my next stop without falling asleep at the wheel. I had the heater on full blast, my hands gripping the steering wheel, the road lit only by my headlights. That's when I saw it. A light, impossibly bright, appearing from the sky like it had always been there, waiting for me. At first, I thought it was a plane, maybe a searchlight from a helicopter. But it was too still, hovering directly in my path, pulsing in this unnatural way. The color was hard to pin down. It started as a sharp blue, then shifted, pulsing between white, purple, and this sickly green. It wasn't normal. And the second I saw it, something in my gut told me I was in danger. I slammed my foot on the gas, hoping to just speed past whatever the hell this was. Bad idea. The moment I tried to accelerate, my truck started to fail. The headlights flickered, the radio cut to static, and the dashboard lights went completely dark. The engine died. The truck, a machine I knew like the back of my hand, was useless. It felt like something had reached inside and just turned it off. Then came the worst part, the feeling. I can't even put it into words. It was like something was pulling me out of myself. Not just out of my seat, but out of my own body. My limbs went weak, my head spun, my stomach turned. My vision blurred, and the world around me started to tilt. I remember gripping the wheel, so hard my knuckles turned white, trying to hold on to something real. But I was already slipping away. The next thing I knew, I wasn't in my truck anymore. I was somewhere else. A place that didn't feel right, like a dream that you can't wake up from. The air was heavy but not hot. The walls were smooth, metallic, almost like liquid metal frozen in time, reflecting light that had no real source. It wasn't like any room I had ever been in. Everything felt too clean, too perfect, too unnatural. I tried to move, but my body was slow, sluggish, like I was underwater. And then I saw them. Tall figures, their skin a dull gray with a strange rubbery texture. Their heads were too large, their eyes black and reflective. Not like human eyes, but like glass, like they weren't looking at me but through me. They moved deliberately, not in a rush, but like they already knew everything they needed to know about me. I tried to speak, to ask what the hell was happening, but my voice didn't come out. I couldn't even hear myself breathe. One of them reached out, long fingers touching my arm, and I swear to God it felt like my skin wasn't even there, like it was touching something beneath me, inside me. I wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but my body wasn't mine anymore. I don't know how long I was there. Time didn't work the same way in that place. There were no clocks, no windows, nothing to mark how many minutes or hours were slipping away. It felt like I was suspended in something. Not quite asleep, not quite awake. The beings, whatever they were, moved around me. their large black eyes scanning me without blinking. One of them held some kind of translucent tool, something that looked like glass but bent like rubber. They pressed it against my chest, and I felt it inside me, as if it was sinking through my skin without breaking it. It didn't hurt exactly, but it felt wrong, like something was being taken out of me, something I couldn't afford to lose. I tried to move, but my arms wouldn't respond. I wasn't tied down, but I might as well have been. The only thing I could do was watch. They weren't talking, at least not in a way I could hear, but I felt something. A presence. Thoughts that weren't mine slipping into my head. It wasn't words exactly, just understanding. Like they knew everything about me, more than I knew myself. I wanted to resist, to fight back, but whatever they were doing was draining me. I was slipping deeper into that fog, into that emptiness where I wasn't sure if I even existed anymore. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The sensation, the fog, the weight pressing down on my mind, it was gone. And I was back, not in my truck, not yet. I was standing, but the floor didn't feel real beneath my feet. The beings had stepped back, watching me with those unreadable, bottomless eyes. I could move again, but I was too weak to do anything but breathe. The room around me shifted, or maybe my perception of it did. The walls weren't solid anymore. They were moving, like water rippling in slow motion. I don't remember feeling afraid in that moment. I should have been terrified, but instead, I just felt empty, like they had taken something from me and I would never know what it was. One of them raised its hand, a slow, deliberate motion. And then, darkness. No fading, no transition, just nothing. When I came to, I was back in my truck, sitting exactly where I had been before, hands still clutching the wheel so tightly my fingers ached. But something was wrong. The first thing I noticed was the radio. It was back on, but it wasn't playing music, just static. A low, distorted hum that made my skin crawl. The headlights were still on, cutting through the empty road ahead, but the dashboard clock was wrong. Hours had passed. I checked my watch. Same thing. I had lost time. 3 hours completely gone. My body felt like it had been wrung out, like I had run a marathon in my sleep. But the road was the same. The night was the same, as if nothing had happened at all. I sat there, frozen, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I didn't understand. I still don't. All I knew in that moment was that I had to get the hell out of there. I turned the key, and this time the engine roared to life like nothing had ever been wrong. But something was wrong. I was wrong. I didn't feel like myself anymore. And even now, decades later, I still don't. I drove like a madman after that. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel steady, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get away. From what? I don't even know. There was nothing behind me. No lights in the sky, no strange figures watching from the roadside. Just the open, empty highway stretching out in front of me like nothing had ever happened. But it had happened. And my body knew it. Every muscle ached. My skin felt stretched too tight, like I didn't fit inside it anymore. My heart was hammering in my chest, but it wasn't just fear. It was something else, something deeper, something that felt wrong in a way I couldn't put into words. And the worst part, I couldn't remember everything. I knew I had been somewhere else, that I had seen things no one was ever supposed to see, but the details were slipping through my fingers like sand. The more I tried to hold onto them, the further they slipped away, leaving behind only that horrible, gnawing emptiness. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see something, anything that would prove I hadn't just lost my mind. But there was nothing. Just the road, the snow, the dark. But I swear to God, even though I couldn't see anything, I could feel something watching me. It took me nearly an hour to reach the next truck stop, and when I finally pulled in, I could barely breathe. My whole body was shaking. My clothes were damp with sweat, despite the cold, and my skin was covered in goosebumps. I killed the engine and just sat there for a long time, trying to convince myself that I was safe now, that it was over. But it wasn't. The second I closed my eyes, even for a blink, flashes of that place came rushing back. The metallic walls, the shifting air, those black, endless eyes staring into me like I was nothing more than an object, a specimen to be studied and discarded. My stomach twisted, and for a second, I thought I was going to be sick right there, in my cab. I forced myself to breathe, to focus on something real, something normal. The truck stop lights, the sound of a distant engine, the smell of diesel and coffee drifting through the cold air. I needed to ground myself. I needed to be here, not wherever the hell they had taken me. I stepped out of the truck, my legs unsteady, and headed inside. There were a few other drivers there, hunched over their meals, lost in their own worlds. I wanted to talk to someone, to tell them what had happened, but how the hell do you even start a conversation like that? Hey, ever been ripped out of reality by something that doesn't belong in this world? Yeah, no. Instead, I just ordered coffee, sat in the farthest corner of the diner, and tried not to completely fall apart. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My watch. I had checked it a dozen times in the truck, but now under the dull fluorescent lights of the diner, I could finally see it clearly. And what I saw made my hands start to shake all over again. The glass was scratched, but not like it had been dropped or hit against something. These were tiny, precise scratches, almost like symbols. Not random marks, not the kind of damage you'd get from regular wear and tear. Deliberate carvings, like something had been etched into it on purpose. I squinted, tracing the marks with my finger, and a sick feeling twisted in my gut. They weren't in any language I recognized. They weren't even letters. They were shapes, patterns that felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Looking at them made my head ache, like my brain was trying to understand something it wasn't supposed to. My pulse pounded in my ears, and for a moment I swore I could hear something beneath the hum of the diner, a sound, low and distant like a whisper just outside the range of human hearing. My vision blurred, and suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was even really here anymore. The world tilted, and for a terrifying second I thought I was about to be pulled back. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white, forcing myself to stay grounded. The diner was still around me, the clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversation, the faint hum of a jukebox playing something old and slow. But the symbols on my watch, they wouldn't go away. The more I stared at them, the more they shifted, like they weren't just scratches on glass, but something deeper, something moving just beneath the surface. My breathing was shallow, uneven. My coffee sat untouched, the steam curling into the cold air. I wanted to tell myself that it was just stress, that my mind was playing tricks on me after the shock of the night, but I knew better. Something had happened. Something that went beyond lost time and strange lights in the sky. I ran a finger over the symbols again, and in that instant, my whole body tensed. I knew them, not consciously, not in a way I could explain, but in the way you recognize a word in a language you don't speak. A feeling deep in my bones, an instinct whispering that I had seen this before, somewhere out there, in that place I wasn't supposed to remember. A cold sweat broke out on my back, and suddenly I wasn't in the diner anymore. Not really. I was between the past and the present, between here and somewhere else. The sensation was so overwhelming that I had to physically shake my head, gripping my wrist like I could somehow squeeze the knowledge out of me. I forced myself to look away, shoving my sleeve down over the watch as if that would make it stop existing. It didn't. But it let me breathe again. I needed to focus on reality, on things I could control. The truck, the road, the next delivery, normal human things. I paid for the coffee, barely hearing the cashier's voice, and stepped back outside. The night was still and unnaturally quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, making you hyper-aware of every breath, every heartbeat. I glanced up at the sky, half expecting to see that pulsing light again, but it was just black. An endless stretch of void, dotted with stars that suddenly felt too sharp, too close. I swallowed hard and climbed back into the truck, locking the doors out of instinct. As I sat there, hands on the wheel, I realized something that made my stomach twist into knots. I had no memory of getting dressed that morning. I had no memory of putting on my jacket, of pulling my boots on, of grabbing my watch. Nothing. Like the entire routine of waking up, getting ready, and hitting the road had been removed. It was like I had just appeared behind the wheel, fully dressed, with the highway stretching ahead of me like it always had. That realization made my skin crawl in a way I can't explain. What else had they taken from me? I don't remember the drive home. I know I must have driven. I got there after all. But when I try to think about it, my mind just blanks out, like those hours were simply cut from my life. The next clear memory I have is standing in my kitchen, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, staring at my reflection in the window above the sink. I looked off, like I was wearing my own body wrong. My skin looked paler than usual, my eyes sunken, my face somehow not mine. I leaned closer, barely breathing, scanning my reflection for anything familiar, and then I saw it. Just below my hairline, behind my right ear, a mark. A small circular scar that hadn't been there before. The skin was smooth, too smooth, like it had healed too perfectly, without any of the roughness of a normal scar. I reached up and touched it, and the second my fingers brushed against it, a jolt of something sharp and electric shot through my skull. Not pain exactly, but recognition. Like a switch being flipped. A memory flickered, just a flash, too fast to grab onto, but in that split second, I saw them again. Those black, endless eyes, that metal room, the sensation of being opened up without being touched, and then it was gone. I stumbled back, my breath coming fast, my pulse a wild drumbeat in my ears. They had done something to me, and whatever it was still inside me. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was on the verge of remembering something I wasn't supposed to. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that if you take one step forward, you'll fall into something so deep and dark that you'll never crawl back out. I sat at my kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of me, my hands gripping the edges like I was afraid the world would tilt sideways again. The scar behind my ear burned, not in a painful way, but like it was aware of me, like it was waiting for me to understand. But I didn't want to understand, I just wanted to go back to before, back when the worst thing I had to worry about was staying awake on long night drives. Back when I didn't have blank spaces in my mind where memories used to be. But you can't go back from something like this. I knew that. The truth was in me now, whether I wanted it or not. And the worst part, I wasn't alone. Even sitting there in my own house with the doors locked and the lights on, I could feel it. That presence. That whisper at the back of my mind, like an itch I couldn't scratch. I wasn't sure if it was them, or if it was something they had left inside me. The days passed, but nothing felt real anymore. I went back to work. I drove. My routes. I tried to pretend that I was still just Jan Bergson, truck driver, normal guy living a normal life. But the illusion never lasted. It was in the little things, the way my food tasted off, the way my own reflection sometimes looked just a little bit wrong, the way I would wake up in bed with the sheets perfectly tucked around me, even though I had no memory of going to sleep. The lost time never stopped. It didn't happen every day, but often enough that I noticed. Sometimes it was just minutes, other times hours. And every time I woke up from it, that scar behind my ear felt warm, like something inside it had just been activated. I tried to ignore it, to pretend it was just paranoia, but deep down, I knew the truth. They weren't done with me. This wasn't something that had happened and ended. It was still happening. I was still being watched, still being studied, still being taken. And the worst part, I started to feel okay with it. That was when I really got scared. One night, a few months later, I woke up outside. Just like that. 1 second, I was in my bed, and the next, I was standing in the middle of a field, barefoot, with the cold wind cutting through my clothes. The truck stop was visible in the distance, the lights flickering against the black sky, but I had no idea how I had gotten there. My body felt heavy, sluggish, like I had just run for miles but had no memory of moving at all. My watch was gone. My shirt was buttoned wrong, like I had put it on in a hurry, or like someone else had put it back on me. I stood there, shivering, staring up at the sky, half expecting to see those lights again. But there was nothing, just the stars. And yet even as I stood there, confused and afraid, I knew that they had been there, that they had done something to me. And this time, I wasn't sure if I had been brought back alone. I don't tell this story often, not because I'm afraid people won't believe me. I don't care about that. It's because every time I talk about it, every time I think too hard about what happened, I feel that presence again, like something waking up inside me, waiting. The lost time never really stopped. I still wake up in strange places sometimes. I still find things in my house moved, altered, just enough to make me question my own memory. And the scar behind my ear, it's still there. It never faded, never changed. Sometimes when I touch it, I feel that same jolt, that brief, electric flicker of a memory too fast to hold on to, too big to understand. And every time I hear something, not with my ears but inside me, a low, distant hum, like a voice just beyond the edge of comprehension. I don't know what it's saying. I don't want to know. All I know is that whatever they did to me, whatever they put inside me, it's still there. And one day I think they're going to turn it back on.
So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you have had a similar experience or have suggestions for future horror stories, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.